amount?
Okay.
Yep, good on you, thank you. They're in similar vein. I might throw the first one to you, Senator Ruston, here in your representative capacity. Is it still government policy to abolish the Clean Energy Finance Corporation? It is. Can you just provide a brief rundown for us as to why?
Well, the government's policy in relation to the Clean Energy Finance Corporation is obviously well known to you. The fact that the Senate has chosen not to agree with the government's policy position in that regard. Obviously, we'll continue to work with Mr Yates and the organisation to maximise the benefit that is able to be delivered by this particular institution. But I think the government made it pretty clear when we were elected that we didn't believe that we should be in the job of being a bank. However, as you well know, Senator Ludlam, the decision of the Senate is such that we still have it, and while we've still got it, we'll maximise the opportunity it provides for this particular area.
Thank goodness for the Senate. So you wouldn't view the CEFC... I can kind of understand why Prime Minister Abbott would have come at the election with that view, but would you not view the CEFC as complementary to the Prime Minister's stated vision of being diverse, agile and innovative?
Look, Senator Ludlam, I mean, the decisions that Cabinet make in relation to policy changes are obviously the remit of Cabinet, and as you know, I'm an Assistant Minister and not subject to privy to those conversations. To the best of my knowledge, there has been no decision to change the policy position in this particular area. But, you know, obviously things change over time and, you know, I'm not in any position to pass judgment one way or the other. But at the moment, the policy of the government has not changed.
Well, you're here defending the policy, presumably. So
Sorry?
you're here defending the policy.
Absolutely.
Yeah, okay. Mr Yates, what proportion of CEFC's projects are in regional or rural areas? Is there kind of a handy breakup without going into too much detail?
I don't have a handy breakup for you, Senator, but I could provide that on notice for you if we can. Normally we do it by state basis, and I can provide you with a state breakdown if you would like.
Yeah, it was more the breakdown between metro and rural and regional that I'm interested. I presume the vast majority are rural and regional.
Well, the vast majority of renewable energy projects are obviously in regional areas and rural areas. However, there's an enormous amount to be done from an energy efficiency perspective in cities. So,
I want to come to some specifics on that in a sec. I don't want to have it become a real headache for somebody to work it out to 10 decimal places, but just rough numbers of what's going on, what sort of work you're financing and supporting in metro as opposed to outside. That would be
we'll take
useful.
that on notice and provide it to you.
And do you have a rough estimate of how much private sector investment you've generated to date?
Currently our leverage multiple is about 1.9, so in other words, for every dollar the CEFC puts in, we're seeing about $1.9 worth of private sector investment coming into the transactions we're in.
I guess I can go to your annual report. Yeah, for sure.
Mr Yates offered to put something on
was
notice, but
yes.
was that the question you answered? You just answered, or was that...
No, it was a different one.
No, I'd
You
moved
didn't
on.
actually say whether you wanted it on notice or not.
No, I'd appreciate it.
Yep.
Rough
Thank you.
numbers.
Sorry, just
That's
to clarify for
Yeah,
him.
it doesn't have to be highly specific. Thanks, Chair. And in terms of private sector investment, your multiple is 1.9.
Yeah.
Rough numbers, how much money is that overall since you started up shop?
Look, I can, well, if it's 1.9, if we've got portfolio commitments of 1.5 billion, logic would apply to it, but I could ask Mr Powell as my CFO to
Go ahead, Mr. Powell.
Information handy.
It would be approximately $3.5 billion.
Of private sector capital?
In total, including...
In total?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. And that capital's been, that wouldn't have been mobilised if you guys hadn't been in business?
That relates to the projects that are within our contract, and it is always difficult to say they wouldn't have happened, okay? But clearly some transactions, particularly the most innovative ones, wouldn't have happened. But we're also trying to change the way people do things. So there are some really good examples, Senator, that I can give you another time permitting, but where even the first transaction we've done, we may not get a large leverage multiple, but then the private sector may copy that transaction and we don't even count that in our numbers.
So you've made it safe. And I'm presuming your investment guidelines are around trying to support projects that need your help, that wouldn't have got up without your intervention.
That's correct. So we don't have a set, like a additionality test, for want of a better word, but if a transaction can get done without our involvement, then we would encourage the transaction to get done.
Of course, point of clarification on that. Would you say, Mr Yates, that's because there's some kind of market failure in relation to financing these kind of projects?
Look, market failure is, I think, an overutilised term. It could be a market failure, but a market failure could also represent the fact that there is not a lot of investors in certain asset class. You could call that a market failure, or you could call it lack of market experience or lack of market volume. If you call that market failure, then yes, it's a market failure. But the markets can't provide answers to everything.
Thank you.
So in terms of benefits to the taxpayer, there's the obvious benefits of more economic activity in a sector that we definitely and desperately need to grow. But your latest annual report identifies, page 134, identifies the CEFC as a retained surplus of $62.6 million. That number's a little bit old now. Have you got a rough idea or maybe a more precise idea of what that's sitting at around now, your retained surplus?
December, Senator, it was about $73 million. We're expecting that to continue, obviously, to grow as we go through the year. So December this year, it was about $73 million is our total retained surplus since we started operation.
So you're $73 million in the black. That's money that would not be available to either the CEFC, which you hold on behalf of taxpayers, if you weren't making good investments. You're making a profit.
Well,
not a
actually,
loss.
it could be a lot worse than that because the investments could be bad and we could lose money. So the objective is to try and encourage activity without losing money.
Yes, the point I'm drawing out is that you're not losing money. You made
That's correct.
$73 million.
Our retained profits are $73 million.
Yeah, okay. So I'm keen to know what happens to that retained surplus, because it seems to me either you can sit on it, you can throw it back into consolidated revenue, or you can give it to ARENA. So let's just tease out each of these options. Firstly, why are you holding a retained surplus rather than one of those other two options?
Well, if we retain the surplus, it means we have to draw down less from Treasury when we make our future investments. So we don't retain it, we just redeploy it in another investment. It's all money going around.
Senator Ruston, feel free to jump in if you want. Was there a direction from the government one way or another about whether the CEFC should reinvest its profits, its retained surpluses in itself, its own operations, spool it out to ARENA, which is pretty short of cash, or bring it back into consolidated revenue? Is there a direction from the government on which of those three options to pursue, or have you left it to the CEFC to make that call?
I'd have to take that on notice, Senator Latham. I'm not aware of... there hasn't been...
Senator,
No direction.
there are only actually two options. The two options are the Minister can, when asked by the CEFC board, agree for a dividend to be paid to ARENA, I think is the way that it works, or otherwise it goes back into our account for which we can draw down on in the future. It's
Okay, but the government can't pull it back into consolidated revenue? Is that in your Act?
It's in the
That is in the Act.
Okay, two choices. That's helpful to clarify. So, Minister, you've just taken the question on notice as to whether there was a direction, although Mr Dixon has just identified that no direction was given as far as CEFC is concerned. So, I might just put a second one on notice to you, if you like, if I could, Minister, around whether it's a conscious decision to let the CEFC retain that money and reinvest it in its own work, or whether you have a view as to whether it should go to ARENA, which is more at the sort of start-up R&D, innovation.
Minister to respond.
Thank you. And I think I'm not quite sure about scheduling, whether ARENA are still scheduled to appear straight after, or whether they've been pushed back down.
Authorities next.
Yeah.
I can't say exactly when ARENA will come on, but it probably might be for a couple of hours.
No,
It'll likely to be after the dinner break.
that's fine. I'll come at them a little bit later. Mr Yates, you identified before that you'd started to do some work in the energy efficiency space in cities. You've made your first foray into residential energy efficiency, which was pretty welcome, with St George Community Housing. You're obviously familiar with that.
Yes.
Okay, that project. It looked pretty good to me. Can you just describe very briefly for the record the nature of that program and how it came about?
Well, Senator, what we've been noticing is that many houses, and certainly in the community housing sector, is that many new houses that are being built for low-income residents are being built to standards which are actually relatively low. And the concern for that is not only the environmental concern, but obviously low-income residents have the least disposable income. So we were putting our low-income residents in some very high operating cost houses. So we looked together with our first transaction with St George Housing Cooperative to work out how we could encourage them to build new homes and new apartments which were much more highly rated than the current ones that they were currently building. And the first building, which is going up now, I'm glad to say, will be 8-star NAFAs, which is a great result. And then in addition, what we said to them is we said, well, whilst we'll set up this program with you, which is a $60 million program to build 200 new houses, we also want to then divert a small amount of the interest revenue that you are paying to us into a community reserve, which will be used to upgrade existing houses. And they've got 4,300 existing houses. Many of them need significant upgrades if they are going to become efficient. So it is a program to set better building standards, to demonstrate that better building standards are better for residents and are cheaper for cooperatives to operate, and it also provides a means by which the cooperative can then undertake programs for their residents to improve the efficiencies in their homes.
That sounds brilliant, and I know your remit is principally around getting investment done, leveraging investment around reducing greenhouse gas emissions, but this happens to have the additional benefit of making people in inefficient housing making their energy bills a lot cheaper. Are there any ways of estimating how much cheaper you've made people's lives in that housing, that inefficient housing?
Well, actually, I think we looked at it, and I can't quote me on this, but I think the difference between 6-star and 7-star is like a 25% reduction in the energy cost as you go through the stars. There's actually a set multiple. So if you like, I'll come back and I'll let you know what the difference on the average is between a NAITHA's 6-star and a NAITHA's 8-star. I'll take that on notice and then come back to you, Senator. But we hope to make this, buildings around this country all need to be built to the highest star rating that is economically viable, and to the extent we can encourage that, it is critical. We just did a search in the property market at the moment, and there are only, I think, 16 or 18 buildings in Australia, commercial real estate buildings, that are built to 6-star. That's all. We are miles behind the rest of the world, and we need to encourage people to build better. These buildings are going to be around for 20 or 30 years, and if we don't get them right now, and it's the same in infrastructure, Senator, we're going to be spending $200 billion on infrastructure over the next 4 years, and the rating requirements there don't exist. So there's a lot of work to be done.
Well, I'm interested in the idea that you might throw back some of the profits and benefits into retrofitting older housing, because particularly older social housing, if anything, that is the hardest cohort to get to.
Well, that's exactly what we decided to do.
So you'll come back at us with some rough numbers on how much money is saved for the individuals in the dwellings? Yeah. Because my rough read is that most rental housing would be NATA's equivalent of about 2-star. A lot of it's crap.
It's true, because the landlord doesn't have an incentive to care about the insulation, because he doesn't have to pay the bill.
And the tenant doesn't have the ability to do anything.
Correct. So there's a real dichotomy there, which we decided to step in to try and fix.
Well, this is my favourite moment of estimates so far today. Tell us how you get this from what you describe on your website as a demo project to scale. How does this become much, much bigger?
Well, Senator, what we like to do is we like to do one demo project, and then with that success we launch a program. Like we have a $250 million program for large-scale solar, having done a number of solar transactions, and we will be probably likely to launch a project which is more available to housing cooperatives right around the country who want to also build better and upgrade their houses, so they too can get the benefit of government funding at a rate above the government's cost of funds, and improve the livelihood of their own members, reduce their own energy costs, and decrease our carbon emissions in one hit.
Okay, this all sounds good. You made it sound as though you've got something in the works. What was that?
It takes me back to previous Labor government's policy.
Indeed. Some of it still survives.
Just.
People are holding on.
Senators, I think it might be helpful if you direct questions and commentary to Mr Yates, not to each other.
Not a gratuitous interaction.
Actually, it might be a good time if I could just interrupt you, Senator Ludlam. I was a bit remiss, but I just wanted to acknowledge Mr Tony Windsor, who's joined us in the room here, a former member for New England for 12 years, if I'm not mistaken. So welcome to this hearing. Thank you.
I've only got Thanks, Chair. That's entirely appropriate. I've only got a couple more. You made it sound like that's in your sort of forward program, without wanting to pin you down to specifics, although if you're happy to give them. At what point can we look for an announcement about taking that to the next scale?
Well, Senator, given the good relationship or the managed relationship we have with our Minister in this coordinated portfolio, we work very closely with our Minister to time appropriate announcements together and make things productive. But,
Okay.
you know, we think that it's an important step forward. This hopefully would be the first area, but it should apply to old age homes, it should apply to improving our hospitals, we've got to improve all of our buildings, and if we can do it with government finance in a way which generates a positive return for the taxpayer, we've got to get on with it.
I'm not sure I could have put that any better. So the CFC's also partnered with a couple of different companies to offer no upfront cost solar panels. What's the model and how is that working in the Australian context?
Well, it's interesting. It hasn't worked as well in the Australian context, or isn't working as well in the Australian context as it worked overseas. We found that Australian homeowners have tended to opt to buy systems on their roof rather than lease them like in the US. But the concept was to follow a US system where people who did not have money to fund a solar system on their home or put in a battery system would be able to obtain finance either through on-bill financing or through with a direct contract with an energy supplier. We've been trying this with a number of parties, but actually the penetration has been low. Individuals tend to opt to sign up and pay for the facility rather than enter into a long contract. I just don't think Australia is the same credit nation as potentially other nations are around the world where this business model has been more effective.
Okay, is it still something, do you still want to play in that space, or you?
We definitely want to make sure that the private sector can have a go at playing in that space, and so we're facilitating programs, but it is actually up for the private sector to make sure that they can make those business models work.
And were you pitching more residential or commercial? There's a lot of rooftop space in commercial districts around the country.
It's residential and commercial. The commercial story always runs into the scenario that often the tenant in the building is not the landlord. So there is that split incentive as well, which causes a problem there.
Okay. Look, thanks, Mr Yates. On the basis of what you told us this morning, that you've made $73 million for taxpayers, you've leveraged nearly $2 billion worth of private capitals, and you're making people living in rental housing's energy bills cheaper. Senator Ruston, could I ask you maybe to take on notice whether you might invite your Cabinet colleagues to reconsider abolishing this agency?
Or perhaps merge with the CSIRO in the new form.
Obviously, Minister Hunt will no doubt be listening this.
Sorry, have you finished, Senator Ruston? Sorry, I'm chairing at the moment because the chair's disappeared.
No, I was actually...
I couldn't hear you.
Sorry, I was just saying that I'm sure Minister Hunt's office is listening to your commentary, and I would suggest that they would be looking at all policy areas to maximise the benefit and the outcome for the Australian people and decisions that they make in whole of government decisions. So,
Well, let's see what comes of that. Thank you, Chair. I'm done.